Looking back now, I realize that love can make you do the craziest things. My name is Ethan Mitchell, and this is the story of how I deliberately sabotaged my academic career for a girl who was trying to get as far away from me as possible. It all started in my sophomore year at Lincoln High School in suburban Massachusetts. That was when Sarah Cooper transferred to our school. She wasn't like the other girls. She didn't care about social media trends or the latest gossip. Instead, she always had her nose buried in a book, usually something by Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters. Her honey blonde hair would fall like a curtain around her face as she read, creating her own little world right there in the crowded cafeteria. What made things complicated was that she immediately became friends with my older brother, James. They shared all these advanced placement classes together, and I'd often come home to find them studying in our kitchen, their heads bent close together over textbooks and calculators. James was a senior, destined for greatness according to our parents, while I was the family's designated free spirit, code for underachiever. I still remember the exact moment I fell for Sarah. It was during one of those study sessions at our house. I was grabbing a soda from the fridge when I heard her laugh at something James said. But it wasn't just any laugh, it was genuine and unrestrained, like wind chimes in a summer breeze. When I turned around, she was wiping tears from her eyes, and for a brief second, our gazes met. Her eyes were this impossible shade of green that reminded me of the sea glass I used to collect as a kid. In that moment, my heart did this weird flip-flop thing, and I knew I was done for. The problem was, Sarah barely seemed to notice me. Sure, she was polite enough when we passed each other in the hallways, but I was just James's little brother to her. I tried everything to get her attention, joined the debate club because I heard her mention she liked guys who could argue intelligently, started reading the same books she carried around, even attempted to learn French because I overheard her telling James she wanted to study in Paris someday. But nothing worked. She was in all these advanced classes, while I was stuck in regular ones. The only class we shared was PE, and let's be honest, nobody looks their best running laps in gym shorts. I started to realize that the gap between us wasn't just academic, it was like we were living in parallel universes that never quite intersected. Then came the day that changed everything. I was hiding out in the library during lunch period, pretending to study while actually watching Sarah across the room. She was with my brother again, and they were looking at something on her laptop. I couldn't help myself. I moved closer, hiding behind a bookshelf, close enough to hear their conversation. "I can't believe you're really going to do it," James was saying, his voice mixed with admiration and surprise. Sarah's response made my blood run cold. "Why not? If I take extra classes over the summer and do dual enrollment at the community college, I can graduate early with your class. Besides, we both got into Princeton. It makes perfect sense." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah was planning to graduate early with my brother. The thought of them both going off to Princeton together, leaving me behind, made me feel physically sick. In that moment, staring at my AP chemistry textbook but not seeing a single word, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. If Sarah was trying to skip ahead a grade to graduate with James, then I would do the opposite. I would purposely fail my classes, forcing myself to repeat sophomore year. That way, when she eventually graduated, assuming my plan worked and she stayed in our grade, we'd have 2 whole years together without my overachieving brother in the picture. Looking back, I know how insane this sounds. But at 16, when your heart is breaking and your hormones are going haywire, even the craziest plans can seem perfectly logical. Besides, I had always been an average student at best. It wouldn't take much to tip the scales toward failure. That afternoon, I went home and created a detailed plan in my journal. I would fail just enough to repeat the year, but not so badly that I'd raise too many red flags or get sent to a counselor. I needed to maintain the appearance of trying while ensuring I didn't accidentally pass anything. It would be a delicate balance, but I was determined to make it work. I started small, forgetting to turn in assignments, deliberately misunderstanding key concepts, showing up late to tests. My teachers were baffled by my sudden decline. I had never been a star student, but I had always at least tried. Now, it seemed like I had completely checked out. My parents were the first to notice something was wrong. Mom started giving me these concerned looks over dinner, while Dad tried to engage me in conversations about my future. James, ever the perfect son, offered to tutor me. I turned him down. Of course the last thing I needed was him figuring out what I was doing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably putting more effort into failing than I had ever put into succeeding. I kept detailed notes about which assignments to miss, which questions to get wrong on tests, even how to appear frustrated enough to be believable without triggering intervention from the school counselor. Sarah, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of my scheme. She continued to visit our house to study with James, and I continued to watch from the sidelines, my heart doing that stupid flip-flop thing every time she smiled. Sometimes, when she was focused on her work, I'd catch glimpses of her biting her lower lip in concentration or twirling a strand of hair around her finger. These little moments became my own private collection of memories, stored away like precious gems. But then something unexpected happened, something that would throw a wrench into my carefully constructed plan. One day, about 2 months into my academic suicide mission, Sarah approached me in the hallway between classes. My heart nearly stopped when she called out my name. Ethan. Wait up, she said, jogging to catch up with me. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and she was clutching a book to her chest. Wuthering Heights, I noticed, because of course I had started paying attention to these details. I've been meaning to talk to you, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. James mentioned you've been struggling with your classes lately, and well, I thought maybe I could help. I'm pretty good at most subjects, and sometimes it's easier to learn from a peer than from your brother. I stood there, frozen, as the full impact of her words hit me. Sarah Cooper, the girl I was secretly destroying my academic career for, was offering to tutor me. The universe, it seemed, had a sick sense of humor. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that none of us could have predicted, events that would test not just my love for Sarah, but my relationship with my brother, my understanding of myself, and everything I thought I knew about love and sacrifice. But standing there in that crowded hallway, looking into those sea glass eyes, all I could think was that I had never been more screwed in my entire life. Part 2, the tutoring sessions. I said yes to Sarah's offer to tutor me. Of course I did. What else could I do? Saying no would have seemed suspicious, and besides, this was exactly what I'd been wanting, a chance to spend time with her, even if it meant completely derailing my carefully orchestrated plan to fail. We started meeting in the school library every Tuesday and Thursday after classes. Sarah was determined to help me improve my grades, which put me in an impossible position. I had to appear to be trying while simultaneously ensuring I didn't actually get better. It was like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. You're smarter than you think, Ethan, she said during one of our first sessions, as we worked through a particularly challenging algebra problem. See how quickly you picked that up. You just need to apply yourself more. If she only knew how much I was actually applying myself to failing. The truth was, I had to study twice as hard as everyone else just to know exactly which answers to get wrong. It was exhausting, and the guilt of deceiving her was starting to eat away at me. But something else was happening during these tutoring sessions, something I hadn't planned for. I was getting to know the real Sarah, not just the idealized version I'd created in my head. She wasn't perfect. She had a terrible habit of interrupting people when she got excited about a topic, and she could be surprisingly competitive about the smallest things. She'd get frustrated when I didn't understand something right away, her nose scrunching up in that adorable way that made my heart skip a beat. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into our tutoring arrangement, she arrived at the library looking upset. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept fidgeting with her bracelet, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize. Everything okay? I asked, genuinely concerned. She tried to brush it off at first, but after some gentle prodding, the story came tumbling out. She'd just found out that her parents were separating. Her dad had accepted a job in California and would be moving there permanently. The news had thrown her carefully planned future into chaos. "That's why I've been pushing so hard to graduate early," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom, she's not doing well with all this. She can barely keep it together some days. I thought if I could get into Princeton, make something of myself quickly, maybe it would give her something to be proud of, something to focus on besides the divorce." In that moment, something shifted between us. This wasn't just about tutoring anymore, it was about two people connecting over their imperfect lives. I found myself sharing things too, about the pressure of being the family disappointment, always living in James's shadow. "At least you're trying to change that now," she said, giving me a warm smile that made my stomach do backflips. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here she was, opening up to me, trusting me, while I was deliberately sabotaging myself for some twisted version of love. But I was in too deep to stop now. As spring approached, things got more complicated. Sarah's extra classes were taking their toll on her. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking. Meanwhile, James was becoming increasingly suspicious of our tutoring sessions. "Your grades aren't improving at all," he confronted me one evening at home. "What exactly are you and Sarah doing in those study sessions?" The way he said it, with that hint of protectiveness in his voice, made something click in my mind. James didn't just see Sarah as a friend, he had feelings for her too. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. My own brother was my rival, and he had everything I didn't: good grades, our parents' approval, and a shared future with Sarah at Princeton. The situation reached a breaking point during midterms week. Sarah had been pushing me especially hard, determined to help me pass. We were studying late in the library, just the two of us, surrounded by towering shelves of books and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. "I don't understand," she said, frustration evident in her voice. "You clearly know this material. I've seen you solve these problems correctly before, but then on the tests, it's like you're deliberately getting them wrong." My heart stopped. She was too smart, too observant. I should have known she'd figure it out eventually. "That's ridiculous," I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Is it? Because I've been watching you, Ethan. You make the same mistakes over and over, but they're not consistent with someone who doesn't understand the material. They're too calculated." The way she was looking at me made my skin crawl. It was like she was seeing through every lie, every carefully constructed facade I'd built over the past months. "I think," she said slowly, "that you need to tell me what's really going on." Just then, James appeared around the corner of the bookshelf. He must have come looking for us when we didn't show up for dinner at our usual time. The look on his face as he glanced between Sarah and me told me he'd heard at least part of our conversation. "Yeah, little brother," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Why don't you tell us what's really going on?" I sat there, trapped between the two people who meant the most to me in the world, knowing that whatever I said next would change everything. The truth was clawing its way up my throat, demanding to be set free. But how could I admit what I'd done? How could I explain that I'd thrown away my academic future just to spend more time with a girl who was in love with my brother? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, counting down the seconds until I had to make a choice: continue the lie and risk losing Sarah's trust forever, or tell the truth and potentially destroy both relationships at once. Either way, I knew that after this moment, nothing would ever be the same again. Part 3, The Truth Comes Out. In the end, it wasn't even my choice to make. Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out a familiar-looking notebook, my journal, the one where I detailed all my plans for failing. My heart plummeted to my stomach as I recognized the worn blue cover. "I found this in the library last week," she said quietly. "You left it behind after one of our sessions." I wasn't going to read it, but then a loose page fell out, and I saw my name. The silence that followed was deafening. James moved closer, his expression a mix of confusion and growing anger. Sarah opened the journal to a marked page and began to read. Operation Stay Behind, Day 47, deliberately missed 3 questions on the calculus quiz today. Had to make sure to get the easy ones wrong so it wouldn't look suspicious. Sarah seemed disappointed. The way she bites her lip when she's worried makes me hate myself a little more each time. She looked up at me, those sea glass eyes now stormy with hurt and betrayal. There are pages and pages of this, Ethan. Detailed plans about which assignments to fail, which questions to miss, all so you could. Her voice cracked slightly, stay in the same grade as me. James snatched the journal from her hands, his eyes scanning the pages rapidly. I watched as his expression shifted from confusion to understanding to fury. You've been doing this on purpose, he exploded. Do you have any idea what Mom and Dad have been going through? Dad's been working extra shifts to pay for your tutoring, and Mom, she's been crying herself to sleep thinking she failed you somehow. The guilt I'd been carrying for months suddenly felt like it would crush me. I hadn't thought about how my actions would affect my parents. I'd been so focused on Sarah, so consumed by my own feelings, that I'd become blind to everyone else's pain. I can explain, I started, but Sarah cut me off. Explain what, Ethan? How you've been lying to everyone. How you've been manipulating me. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. I've been spending every spare moment trying to help you, feeling like I was failing as a tutor, as a friend, when all along you were just using me. No. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. It wasn't like that. I love you, Sarah. I've loved you since the first time I heard you laugh in our kitchen. I couldn't stand the thought of you graduating early, of you going off to Princeton with James and leaving me behind. I just wanted more time with you. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to take back. James took a step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. You self-centered little. He started, but Sarah stepped between us. Stop, she said, and something in her voice made us both freeze. Just, stop. This isn't about you, James. And Ethan. She turned to me, her expression softer but somehow more devastating. What you did, it's not love. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't make the other person feel guilty and inadequate. She gathered her books with trembling hands. I need some time to process this. Please, both of you, just leave me alone for a while. We watched her walk away, her shoulders straight but her head bowed. As soon as she was gone, James turned to me. You know what the worst part is, he said, his voice quiet but intense. I was going to step aside. Sarah and we've been getting closer, yes, but I saw how you looked at her. I thought maybe, if you got your act together, you might actually deserve her. So I encouraged her to tutor you, thinking it would give you a chance. But this? He gestured at the journal. This is pathetic, Ethan. And sadly, it's exactly what everyone expected from you. His words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. Because he was right, I had lived down to everyone's lowest expectations of me. In trying to hold on to Sarah, I had become exactly the kind of person she could never love. The next few weeks were a blur of consequences. My parents were called in for a conference when the school discovered what I'd been doing. The disappointment in my father's eyes, the tears in my mother's, they haunted me. I was assigned mandatory counseling sessions and had to agree to a supervised academic improvement plan. Sarah stopped coming to our house altogether. I would see her in the hallways sometimes, but she would always look away. James and I barely spoke anymore, the silence between us heavy with unspoken accusations and regret. But the worst part wasn't the punishment or the isolation, it was realizing that in my desperate attempt to keep Sarah close, I had pushed her further away than any distance could have. She had trusted me, believed in me, seen something in me worth saving, and I had thrown it all away for a selfish, juvenile scheme. One afternoon, about a month after everything fell apart, I found an envelope in my locker. Inside was a letter written in Sarah's neat handwriting. Dear Ethan. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, trying to understand. I think maybe I owe you an apology too. I should have seen that you were struggling with something bigger than just academics. I was so focused on my own plans, my own need to prove myself, that I missed the signs. But Ethan, what you did, it wasn't just about failing classes. You failed to trust in yourself, in me, in the possibility that real connections don't need to be forced or manipulated. You tried to control something that should have been allowed to grow naturally or end naturally. I'm still going to graduate early. Not for my mom anymore, but for me. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own, that I can make decisions about my future without letting anyone else's feelings or actions define my path. I forgive you, but I need you to understand something: love shouldn't diminish us. It should make us want to be better, to grow, to reach for our highest potential. What you did wasn't love, it was fear. And I hope someday you learn the difference. Sarah. I read the letter until the words blurred together, then I did something I should have done months ago. I went to find my brother. It was time to start fixing what I had broken, even if I had no idea how to begin. Part 4, The Path to Redemption. I found James in his usual spot, the garage, where he'd converted half the space into a makeshift gym. He was aggressively attacking a punching bag when I walked in, and from the sweat soaking his shirt, he'd been at it for a while. What do you want? He asked without stopping, each word punctuated by a punch. To apologize, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. And to ask for your help. That made him stop. He grabbed a towel and turned to face me, his expression guarded. Help with what? With everything. With fixing my grades, really fixing them this time. With becoming someone better. I pulled out Sarah's letter and handed it to him. She made me realize something. All this time, I've been so scared of not being good enough that I made sure I wasn't. It was easier to fail on purpose than to try and fail anyway. James read the letter slowly, his face softening almost imperceptibly. When he finished, he looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You know what your problem is, Ethan? You've always taken the easy way out. Even this grand gesture of failing was, in its own twisted way, easier than actually putting yourself out there and risking real rejection. His words stung, but they were true. I'd chosen to control the narrative of my failure rather than face the possibility of genuine disappointment. It was cowardly, and Sarah had seen right through it. To my surprise, James didn't kick me out of the garage. Instead, he sat down on his weight bench and patted the space next to him. Sit, he commanded. Let's figure this out. What followed was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my brother. We talked about everything: our rivalry, our parents' expectations, and yes, Sarah. He admitted that while he cared deeply for her, what they had was more of a deep friendship built on shared ambitions and intellectual connection. He'd recognized long ago that her heart might lie elsewhere, even if she hadn't realized it herself. But you screwed up royally, little brother, he said, shaking his head. If you want any chance of making things right, you need to focus on yourself first. Sarah needs to see that you can be better because you want to be better, not because you're trying to win her back. He was right, of course. The next morning, I marched into the guidance counselor's office and laid everything out: my deliberate failing, my current grades, and my desire to turn things around. Ms. Rodriguez, instead of judging me, simply pulled out my academic record and started plotting a recovery plan. It won't be easy, she warned. You'll need to make up all the work you deliberately failed, plus stay on top of your current classes. We're talking about summer school, extra credit assignments, and probably some independent study. I'm ready, I said, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. The next few weeks were brutal. James helped me create a study schedule that would make a military sergeant proud. Every spare moment was devoted to catching up on the material I'd pretended not to understand. My parents, once they saw I was serious about improving, hired additional tutors to help me make up lost ground. Sarah, true to her word, kept her distance, but I could feel her awareness of my efforts. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me in the library, where I now spent most of my afternoons actually studying instead of just pretending to. Once, after I got back a makeup test with an A, my first in months, I saw her smile slightly before quickly looking away. The real breakthrough came during a mandatory session with the school counselor. Dr. Peterson had been trying to get me to open up about the underlying reasons for my academic self-sabotage. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "what strikes me about your situation is that you went to such elaborate lengths to stay close to someone, but in doing so, you made it impossible for them to really see you." "What do you mean?" I asked, though something in his words resonated uncomfortably. "Well, think about it. You were so focused on maintaining physical proximity to Sarah that you never gave her the chance to know the real you. Instead of showing her your genuine self, your interests, your capabilities, your potential, you created this elaborate facade of failure. How could she ever truly connect with someone who wasn't being authentic?" His words hit me like a thunderbolt. All this time, I'd been so focused on keeping Sarah in my orbit that I'd never actually given her a reason to want to stay there. I'd been like one of those fake plants in our school's office, looking like the real thing from a distance, but ultimately hollow and artificial. That evening, I started a new journal. Not to plot schemes or record failures, but to document my genuine thoughts, fears, and hopes. I wrote about my childhood dream of becoming an architect, something I'd abandoned because it required too much effort. I wrote about my fear of living in James's shadow, and how I'd used that fear as an excuse to not try. I wrote about Sarah, not just my feelings for her, but what she'd taught me about authenticity and self-worth. As spring turned to summer, I threw myself into summer school and makeup work. My grades slowly began to improve, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was finally allowing myself to engage with the material. To my surprise, I discovered I actually enjoyed chemistry when I wasn't deliberately trying to fail it. One day, as I was leaving the summer school building, I quite literally ran into Sarah. She was carrying a stack of books from the community college where she was taking extra classes, and they went flying everywhere. As we both knelt to pick them up, our hands brushed briefly over a copy of Pride and Prejudice. "I finally read it," I said, handing her the book. "Turns out Darcy and I have something in common. We both had to learn how to stop being our own worst enemies." She looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, like she was seeing something new. "I heard about your A in chemistry," she said finally. "And James told me you've been talking about applying to architecture programs." I nodded, feeling my face heat up. "Yeah, well, turns out when you actually try at something, you might discover you're not half bad at it." A ghost of a smile played at her lips. "Elizabeth Bennet had to learn that lesson too, you know. About not letting pride or prejudice or fear keep her from seeing the truth about herself and others." Before I could respond, she had gathered her books and was walking away. But this time, the distance between us felt different. Not like an ending, but like the space needed for something new to begin. Part 5, Coming Full Circle. The summer before senior year was drawing to a close, and I found myself sitting in Ms. Rodriguez's office again, this time looking at a very different set of grades. Through summer school, extra credit work, and countless hours of actual studying, I'd managed to not only make up for my deliberately failed classes but also pull my GPA up to a respectable 3.7. "I have to admit, Ethan," Ms. Rodriguez said, smiling as she reviewed my transcript, "this is one of the most remarkable turnarounds I've seen in my career. Have you given any more thought to college applications?" I nodded, pulling out a folder of carefully researched architecture programs. This wasn't about following Sarah anymore, this was about following my own dreams, ones I'd buried under years of self-doubt and manufactured underachievement. As I left her office, I saw James waiting in the hallway. He'd delayed his departure for Princeton by a few weeks to help me prepare for senior year, something I hadn't asked for but was immensely grateful for. "Ready for this?" he asked, falling into step beside me. Ready as I'll ever be, I replied, clutching my class schedule for the new year. I'd signed up for several AP classes not because Sarah was in them, she'd already completed her requirements and would indeed be graduating early, but because I finally believed I could handle them. That's when we saw her. Sarah was coming out of the library, her arms full of books she was returning before her early graduation. She'd be leaving for Princeton in just a few days, starting her college journey a semester early just as she'd planned. "I'll catch up with you later," James said, giving my shoulder a squeeze before discreetly heading in the opposite direction. Sarah saw me and stopped. For a moment, we just looked at each other, all the words we'd left unsaid hanging in the air between us. "I heard you're taking AP Physics this year," she said finally. "Yeah. Turns out I actually like understanding how things work instead of pretending not to." She smiled a real smile, the kind that used to make my heart do backflips. It still did, if I was being honest, but the feeling was different now. Less desperate, more peaceful. "I found this in one of the books you returned to the library," she said, pulling something from her bag. It was a page torn from my new journal, one I hadn't even realized was missing. "Old habits die hard, huh?" I felt my face flush, but I didn't try to grab it or make excuses. On that page, I'd written about my new dreams, about discovering who I could be when I stopped letting fear drive my decisions. I'd also written about her, but not in the same obsessive way as before. Instead, I'd thanked her for seeing through my deception, for holding me accountable, for inadvertently teaching me what real love should look like. "I meant every word," I said quietly. She folded the page carefully and handed it back to me. "I know. That's why I wanted you to have it back. The Ethan who wrote this, he's someone I wish I'd gotten to know sooner." "Yeah, well, he took his time showing up," I joked, but we both knew it wasn't really a joke. "I'm leaving for Princeton on Sunday," she said, shifting her weight slightly. "I know. James told me you're applying to the architecture program there." "Among others," I said quickly. "I'm also looking at MIT, Cornell, and a few other schools with strong programs. I figured it's best to keep my options open." She nodded approvingly. That's really great, Ethan. You know, it's funny. A year ago, you were trying so hard to stay in the same place, and now look at you, you're finally moving forward." "I learned from the best," I said, and we both knew I meant her. An announcement over the PA system reminded us that the library was closing soon. Sarah glanced at her watch and adjusted her bag. "I should go. Still have some packing to do." "Sarah," I called as she turned to leave. She paused, looking back at me. "I know this might sound strange, but, thank you. For not letting me get away with being less than I could be. For showing me what real strength looks like." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what's really amazing, Ethan? You did all of this, the grades, the improvement, the growth, not to get closer to me, but to get closer to yourself. And somehow, that made all the difference." As I watched her walk away, I realized something profound. A year ago, I had tried to fail my way into Sarah's heart, thinking that staying in her grade was the only way to stay in her life. Now, as we were about to go our separate ways, I felt closer to her than ever before, not because of any scheming or manipulation, but because I had finally become someone worthy of the potential she'd seen in me all along. I pulled out my phone and texted James, "Thanks for waiting. Let's go home." Later that night, as I sat at my desk working on college applications, I came across Sarah's letter from all those months ago. The one where she'd written about love making us want to be better, to grow, to reach for our highest potential. I finally understood what she meant. Sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about growing up, about becoming the person you were meant to be, even if that means letting go. Sarah and I might end up at the same college, or we might not. We might reconnect someday, or our paths might lead us in different directions. But either way, I knew that the love I felt for her now, the real kind, the kind that celebrates growth and independence, would always be a part of who I am. Because in the end, the greatest love story isn't about getting the girl or orchestrating the perfect romance. It's about learning to love yourself enough to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to stop settling for less than what you're capable of becoming. And that's a story worth failing for, and more importantly, worth succeeding for.